Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Caucus. If our legislative aide could call the roll and say who's here.
Adams is absent. Anane? Absent. Ballerin is absent. Brody? Here. Farrell?
Here.
Flynn is absent. Hoey?
Here.
Johnson?
Present.
Jones?
Present.
Keegan?
Here.
Lumpkin?
Present.
Powell?
Here.
Williamson is absent. Robinson is absent. And Zamer?
Here.
That makes 9 present. We are also joined by Council President Kelly Kimbrough, as well as City Clerk Shaniqua Jackson, Senior Assistant Corporation Counsel Martha Mahoney, Counsel Robert Wenner, and myself, Junior Policy Analyst Carly Johnson.
And we have people from Capitalize Albany joining us today to go through some things, so we'll welcome them up and then we'll go into the agenda.
There we go. I got it. Oh, thank you. I'm well set up now. Good evening, everyone. I am Kaylee Hogan-Schnitker. I'm the Senior Economic Developer for Capitalize Albany Corporation, the economic development agency for the City of Albany. Thank you so much for having us tonight to give you an opportunity to address the 2026 RADC Consolidated Funding Application, also known as the CFA, as well as the local process for this round of funding. I will definitely do my best to be brief, but I do know that a few of you are new, so I want to make sure I give a good overview so you know exactly what to expect this summer. As we have in the past, Capitalize Albany will continue to act as the liaison for projects pursuing CFAs, working closely with the City and Mayor's Office to provide support to those who are seeking funding. For previous rounds, we've managed and facilitated a large number of applications, many of which have received that well-deserved funding. Before I dive into the local process, I will give a quick overview of the Regional Economic Development Councils, and then of course the program that's before us. So the Regional Economic Development Councils, the REDCs, support the state's innovative approach that empowers regional stakeholders to establish pathways to prosperity mapped out in regional strategic plans. There are 10 different regional councils across the state. We're part of the Capital Region Council, and each council serves as the voice for the region and advises agencies on the programs and projects that are valuable to the region that they're in and align with the priorities set by the state and each of those regions. I'll briefly go through some of those different priorities. So for our statewide strategies, the first one is placemaking. So recognizing that where investment occurs matters, it should be strategic, improve access to job centers, promote sustainable infrastructure investments, and support attracting a talented workforce. Second is workforce, the belief that people drive the economy and investment should be made to prioritize equitable targeted job training and education for jobs in high-paying, high-demand tradable sectors. Tradable sectors is also a priority for the state. By promoting the attraction of cultivation of industries, New York State is targeting to increase export-based employment opportunities such as manufacturing, agricultural products, and energy. And their final strategy is innovation. The strategy of investing in and creating synergies between research and commercialization to drive the economy forward. And then our regional strategies, as put forth by the CREDC, start with people, connecting people to training and wraparound services to access and thrive in good-paying jobs. Those wraparound services are prioritized with childcare, coaching, housing, and transportation. Their second priority is place. So leverage revitalization and the creative sectors to drive community investment, vibrancy, and industry diversification with a focus on sustainable growth. Innovate, drive entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, and grow. Grow the region's most competitive industry clusters and legacy manufacturers. This strategy strives to cultivate shared economic prosperity by helping develop, grow, and attract businesses that invest in the region and create jobs. Not only does the REDC play a very pivotal role in this annual CFA push, they also play a critical role in selecting the Downtown Revitalization Initiative and New York Forward communities. Detailed information about all of these strategies can be provided on the handouts that we sent out ahead of time, but you can also visit the RED website at regionalcouncils.ny.gov. So both the REDC and CFA were created to advance efforts to improve New York's business climate and continue that economic growth. The CFA includes core capital and tax credit funding that will be combined with a wide range of agency programs throughout the CFA process. This year, there are over 20 programs available through 8 state agencies for this initiative. And I'll list them out here briefly along with the funding. So Empire State Development has up to $84.8 million available, up to $1 million for New York State Canal Corporation, up to $25 million for Energy Research Development Authority, up to $29.2 million for Homes and Community Renewal, $28.7 for Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, and at least $96 million for the Department of Environmental Conservation, and then up to $20.7 million from the Department of State. The programs listed above do adhere to that July 31st, 4 p.m. deadline, while there are 3 other programs that fall under open enrollment, including Empire State Development's Excelsior Jobs Program, the CDBG program through Homes and Community Renewal, and the state's Power Authority. CFAs are submitted through a central application portal for state grants, and while this portal is open year-round for certain Empire State Development capital programs, again, this annual push for the state's grant programs are due at the end of July. And so briefly, I will go into kind of the local process. So together with the City of Albany, Capitalize Albany is working to provide support and technical assistance to potential applicants in the city. Even if someone is just interested in exploring a potential project, we do serve as a local resource center to kind of walk through any questions that they might have or point them in the direction of a state agency who can help them dive a little bit deeper into some of those details. This year, we are hosting 3 different opportunities to connect with Capitalize staff and Empire State Development staff to learn more about the CFA and the local process, as well as provide time for specific questions. We had our first event last night at the West Hill Community Center, and we have 2 more opportunities, one coming up on June 16th at 200 Henry Johnson at 4:30 p.m., and then we have a virtual opportunity as well on June 22nd at 1 p.m. We will likely record that and post it online so folks can continue to receive that information. Outside of the workshops that we are hosting with the city, we are also coordinating letters of support on behalf of Capitalize Albany and the mayor's office for applications that do require that as part of their supplemental information. Additionally, some of these programs do require municipal resolutions, which we also help coordinate on behalf of the applicant. So you will see me again this summer. If an applicant is seeking a resolution or letters of support, they must fill out a project intake form that Capitalize Albany and the city have put together. And this form provides an overview of the applicant's project and the funding source that they're seeking, which of course helps us provide that support. The form can be found on Capitalize Albany's website, as well as other helpful resources for those who are looking to apply. Before I conclude, I'll list off a couple dates of deadlines coming up, and then I'm happy to take any questions. So June 25th is going to be our project intake form that is due to Capitalize Albany. Due to the need of getting resolutions, we do have a hard deadline on this so that we have the opportunity to coordinate those things for folks' applications. I will be back next month on the 15th to present any applications that do require resolutions, and then on the 20th, we'll come back to hopefully vote on those. And last but not least, July 31st at 4 p.m. is the application deadline. So we try to say that one as loud as we can, because even if you submit it 401, it's over. So make sure folks are taking a lot of time. The REDCs will spend the fall scoring the applications, and then awards will be announced by the end of the year. And that's all I have. Any questions? All right, well, you have my contact. Oh, go ahead.
Just if there is anything, like any information that you'd like us to share out on the council page, we're very happy to. If you want to send it over to the amazing Carly, I'm sure that she would repost it. So if that's helpful at all, we're very happy to do that. And we appreciate you coming in and filling us in on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll circle back with Carly. And yeah, if there's any questions, my contact information is on, I think, some of the handouts that were sent out ahead of time, but I also have some cards. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So we will move through the agenda. We have local laws introduced from Councilmember Brody, Local Law L of 2026, which will go to Finance. That amends the Code of the City of Albany to update existing financial reporting requirements, applying to the auditor, and new requirements applying to the treasurer and the Department of Administrative Services. Did you want to say anything about that, Councilmember Brody?
Yes, thank you. I'm excited to, in partnership with all of our branches of government, think through how we move forward. Obviously, the financial crisis that we've found ourselves in is something to be reckoned with, and we're extraordinarily grateful for the funding that our state delegation has provided us. And this local law really addresses three things that will help us make sure that in the future we're much more aware of our situation going forward and have accurate, timely, and thorough information. So first is reporting on cash on hand. Waiting for the full quarterly report is a bit slow when you're in the middle of a constrained fiscal situation as we are now. We also want to better understand revenues in and out, both intergovernmental and grant related. I know in discovering the deficit that we're in this year, we realized there were a number of grants that potentially had expired, or that we weren't aware, payment was coming in or out on the particular day. This gives us, if passed as proposed, would give us a lot more clarity into what we expect and when. And we also want to make sure that we're giving everybody access to this in a very public manner too. So we made sure to include opportunity to not just report this to the council, but to post publicly as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, from Councilmember Ballerin, Local Law M of 2026, which will go to Human Rights, Human Resources. This is a local law amending the code in relation to designating an end-of-term date for commission members. I believe this is just a clarification in terms of human rights, the Commission on Human Rights terms. So that will go to Human Rights, Human Resources. Then from Councilmember Hoey, Local Law N of 2026, which will go to Finance. This is amending the veterans exemption for taxes by adding a new section to provide for an additional exemption for the primary residence of disabled veterans. Did you want to say anything on that,
Sure.
Councilmember Hoey?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, President Pro Tem. The state has just passed a law where they leave it up to the municipalities whether to be able to do a full exemption for disabled veterans. And we're talking about totally disabled. And there are regulations guiding what that exactly means. And from when I talked to Trey about it, we're looking at maybe it might be around $14,000 with the amount of veterans that are on the books that own property in the city of Albany. And what would happen is that $14,000 would be distributed among the whole tax base of homeowners in the city. I think it's a worthwhile motion or, idea to help our veterans out who go and fight wars for us. And, it just, to me, it's a good thing, but I hope everybody will be supportive. And, the city of Albany has a history of not providing care for veterans who come back. And we have a Medal of Honor winner, Johnson, who came back from World War I, a hero, and he dared to speak up about discrimination in the service and destroyed his life. And I didn't know all this till I moved to Albany. It's disgraceful that we send young men off to fight for us, and, if they get disabled and wounded, both mentally and physically, I think it's important that we recognize that they were serving their country, serving their state, and serving the city by going out there and putting their lives in danger. So I hope everybody will be supportive. We will have Trey come in and talk during the meeting to get over, really go over the numbers so people feel comfortable. I know this is a rough time in the city, but we have to look out for the men and women who fight for us and keep us safe and our democracy going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoey. Next in local law is held. From Councilmember Johnson, local law H of 2026, we'll be voting on that. That is amending Chapter 42 and 187 in relation to adding protections against housing discrimination and increasing the enforcement of fair housing violations. We amended that last meeting, and we'll be voting on it this meeting. Did you want to say anything about it, Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you. After our last housing committee meeting, and we had some people come down, or actually our last council meeting, we had the elders come down and talk about their living conditions. So, in housing, it's room for a lot of conversations. And as I said at the committee meeting, we're anytime we can put oversight and put rules in place, I think that helps the situation out for the renters. But the conversation shouldn't just stop at the renter side. There are many other conversations that we can have to address issues that both sides are happening. And I hope that we start utilizing the committee to have those conversations so that we can create a level playing field for both sides of the renter and the landlord conversation. But yeah, I hope that everybody will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Keegan?
I just wanted to tag on to Councilmember Johnson on local law H. So, our fair housing advocate does try to work with tenants and landlords to resolve issues of housing discrimination before we go to court. And the way that our human rights law is structured, our residents do have the ability to lean on the city for assistance with litigation in the courts on these matters. So we do absorb some significant costs at the city level with regards to prosecuting those cases. We are also, without any reimbursement, paying for that housing services advocate position, which I think is incredibly important service for our residents to have. By having the fine structure in place, it provides that advocate with a bit more teeth when working with landlords to avoid having to go to court in order to bring a successful resolution for tenants. And the estimated revenue, my understanding is it's anticipated that it would bring in about $40,000 in revenue to the city in fines issued. And that's based on the history of successful cases that we've prosecuted against landlords who are engaged in housing discrimination. So I just wanted to add those pieces for anybody who wasn't at those meetings to discuss the legislation.
Thank you very much. Next from Councilmember Keegan, Local Law I of 2026, which if it moves through the Finance Committee meeting tonight, will be voted on. That is local law clarifying and revising requirements related to budget transfers after adoption of the budget. Did you want to say anything about this, Councilmember Keegan?
I mean, this is going to be discussed in committee this evening. You know, I don't know if our attorneys want to weigh in on the memos that were issued to the council, both from Corporation Counsel's office and or wait until our finance meeting. But, you know, essentially the council updated legislation with regard to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment in 2021. That granted, there were two pieces of legislation that were passed. One provided specific representation on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment for the Common Council, and the second piece provided clarification on the definition of what a budget transfer would be. We certainly, as a body, have to take ownership over the fact that we did not really enforce that change in definition over the next 4 years, and that we really didn't think through what was intended by that until this most recent fiscal crisis. But this legislation is simply intended to further clarify and update the changes that the council made in 2021. And at issue is how certain movements of money that are currently classified as appropriations, should they be counted as budget transfers or not. I think the law currently is pretty clear that they should be counted, but rather than have that argument, we've included that language so that it will now count towards the 4%. In terms of the concerns about impeding the city's ability to meet its fiscal obligations and conduct business in a timely fashion once that 4% threshold is met. First, I would say, you know, you're talking about a significant amount of money. I think it's somewhere between $8 and $9 million at present that we would have to move around between budgeted line items before we reach that 4% threshold. And the council certainly has the ability, once that 4% threshold is met, to decide and determine that, you know, budget transfer requests of a certain amount certainly do not need to come before the council. What that amount might be would be determined by the council when that 4% threshold is met, but we don't necessarily, I just can't imagine the finance committee wanting to manage, you know, requests to move $100 here and, you know, $1,000 there. But we certainly want to know when millions of dollars are being moved. And so that's really the purpose and intent behind this legislation, is to ensure that we have a full agreement on and what classifies as a budget transfer.
I would say it's probably best to discuss it in the Finance Committee meeting, since that's what we're meeting on, and we'll be meeting right after. I would note, just in us not fully utilizing this power for 4 years, we didn't necessarily have the information in order to utilize it, which also factors into the need for the clarification. Next, from Councilmember Hoey, Local Law J of 2026. This is something that will be discussed at Council Operations and Ethics right before our next council meeting on the 15th. And that will be to basically clarify there's something that our council discovered, that we have some issues in doing emergency meetings that need to be clarified. So that will clarify that in our rules to allow for emergency meetings in a better way. did you want to add anything to that, Councilmember Hoey?
And I think I spoke last caucus about it, but I think it just shows that this council always looks at laws, and if we see a problem, we'll fix them, and in a timely manner. So when this came up, within weeks, we got legislation ready. So it's good for the people in the city to know that we're active and we're on top of things, and sometimes we pass legislation, there might be something needs a tweak, and we're willing to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have we're not moving any ordinances, nor are we introducing any ordinances, so moving on to resolutions introduced from Councilmember Anane, Resolution 606226R, which is recognizing June 19th as Juneteenth Independence Day. I'm going to assume that is, if I could see council members that would like to co-sponsor that, we'll note that as an all co-sponsor. Next from Councilmember Anane, you are there, I cannot see you. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, on June 19th, 1865, more than 2 years after Emancipation Proclamation, it wasn't reached out to the frontier that slavery was over until 2.5 years later. And this is a day that a lot of African Americans in our country like to celebrate, to honor those who was enslaved and also find out the information. So again, I want to thank all my colleagues for their continued support on this resolution.
Thank you so much. Next from Councilmember Adams, Resolution 616226R, a resolution of the Common Council of Albany, New York, declaring the week of June 15th to be Black Restaurant Week. Council members that would like to co-sponsor this resolution? This looks like another all play. And while Councilmember Adams is not here currently to speak to it, I know that there's a lot of very exciting restaurants that are part of this, and I highly recommend taking the time to take full advantage of the different opportunities that are there and to make sure that we're pushing this out too. Next from Councilmember Zamer, Resolution 626226R. That is a resolution of the Common Council reappointing Daniel Kirk Davidoff to the Sustainability Advisory Committee. That will go to Planning. Then from Councilmember Zamer, Resolution 636226R, a resolution of the Common Council reappointing Andre Lake as a member of the Sustainability Advisory Committee. That will go to Planning. Did you want to say anything about those? Next from Councilmember Adams, Resolution 646226R, which will go to General Services. It is a resolution honoring the life and legacy of Madeline Seal and renaming a portion of Ramos Street in her honor. Next from Councilmember Johnson, Resolution 656226R, a resolution of the Common Council honoring the life and legacy of Reverend James Smith Sr. and renaming a portion of Franklin in his honor. That will go to General Services. Did you want to say anything about that, Councilmember Johnson? We'll have plenty of opportunity to. Next, from Councilmember Robinson, Resolution 666226R, a resolution of the Common Council honoring the life and legacy of Days Dobbs and renaming a portion of Thornton Street in her honor. That will also go to General Services. The rest of the resolutions are held. To just go through our leadership meeting, and Councilmember Anane or President, if you want to weigh in at any point, please do. A quick note that Councilmember Johnson brought up an issue where people were tearing down no parking signs, and then people were parking in the no parking area and getting towed or ticketed or all sorts of things. This is something that the mayor's office has also heard of, and other council members echoed that they've had some issues with this as well. And so Deputy Mayor Ellis is actually working on something with this. He had already been working on something with this, so it's good to know that the mayor's office is not just aware of it, but already working on it and are aware of the issue. But I would say, in the meantime, as it's happening, if you have any questions or anything like that, you can reach out to Deputy Mayor Ellis on it. But he is working through it to try to find a solution. It's complicated because it's a situation where the city is doing the right thing by putting up the signs. the person that is parking there is also not doing anything wrong because there are no signs. And it is the random person that's tearing the signs down that is actually at fault. So they're working through some ways to kind of find a solution where people are not deeply penalized for something like this or penalized at all. Next, we just mentioned there's been a lot of reports different council members have brought up of ICE activity, and to just reiterate, which the mayor very much reiterated and we've heard from the previous administration too, APD does not coordinate in any way with ICE. As a result of that, they are not informed of anything that ICE is doing in this nature. And the administration is in process of a more formalized response and will be back in touch with us about the best ways that we can support our constituents and also help people navigate what is a real, like a confirmed ICE sighting versus a non-confirmed, and also just making sure we're supporting people through it. Just to note, we've also discussed vital statistics going back to the administrative services. This is something that happened under a previous clerk that came from vital statistics, so it was kind of a seamless thing, but it does make a lot of sense to actually have vital statistics separate. And I will say our own clerk mentioned this, I think in 2024 even. So it's something that we appreciate the administration's support with this and their willingness to move that office back under their wings. A quick note, Brian Jimenez is off this week, so if you have anything, if you don't mind reaching out to Bobby and Carly instead, that would be appreciated. And I think those were the main things that were discussed that does not involve the Finance Committee meeting, which we'll be discussing in a moment. Do you have anything to add, Councilmember Manane or President Kimbrough? No. Great. So, oh, Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, I just want to find out what is the status. We have one open position here for the council. Are we under the freeze or?
So technically we are not under the freeze. It's something because we're independently elected, we are not under the hiring freeze. However, it is something that we felt that it was the right choice to delay in hiring that position. I believe we actually have 2 open positions. But I think it's something that leadership, especially with the additional state aid that the mayor's office so expertly championed, it is something that we certainly would like to do because it's a lot of pressure on our staff. Councilmember Keegan?
I just wanted to note on that end that, you know, towards the end of last session, we established the Commission on Disabilities, and the Sheehan administration indicated that they would not support that legislation without the council being willing to staff that commission. And because of our lack of staffing, we have not gotten that off the ground, which I find very troubling and concerning. So at the same time, I also don't think it's fair to ask Brian or Carly to add one more board to their plate without having staff coming on board. So I would just very much support us moving ahead with trying to backfill that position, and just also wanted to raise like the concern that we're now at June. It's now been 8 months since we passed, and we haven't even solicited applications for people to come onto that board. And we did that with such intent. And now they seem to be again like one of those entities that is being sidelined and forgotten as a result of very real staffing issues, but still should be something that we prioritize, at least getting them situated with a selected group and working on bylaws.
Yeah, because and the reason I bring this up, you know, you said Brian's out. If Carly gets sick, or you know, if any of our, you know, if people get sick, and things happen, life happens, it'd be nice to have, you know, full roster there that we can back up. Plus, you know, it's summer, it's slow right now, but come the fall, we might, you know, things are going to probably pick up. So, I know it's hard, but it just I'd
No,
like to see it opened up again.
I think that with our, as I said, with the change in state aid, it is something that we can certainly consider doing. So we'll add that to our leadership discussion that we have. Councilmember Anani?
And just kind of remind people about the Pride Parade this Sunday. The kickoff is at 11:20. We encourage members to show up a little. Oh, and BIPOC Pride on Saturday. We encourage people to show up at 10:45. Again, this is one of the biggest Pride parades outside of New York City and upstate, so it's a great time for new members. It'll be great just to show up and support. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, and I believe that that information was just sent out today too, so you can check your email for more detailed information. And we do have resolutions for both that I think we'll be presenting. Any other questions? So with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn caucus.
Motion
and
adjourn?
Turn it over to all in favor.
Aye.
All right, I will turn it over to Councilmember Keegan.
Who's staying for finance? If you could just raise your hands. Okay. Howell, Anane. Laura Menzo, you're staying too? You're not? Okay. Okay, because the New York Knicks are starting at 8 o'clock tonight, we are going to get started if we can. So welcome to the Wednesday, June 10th, 2026 Finance, Taxation, and Assessment Committee meeting. Committee members present this evening are council members Farrell, Lumpkin, Brody, and Keegan. Council member Ballerin is excused due to a family obligation. We also have council members Powell and Anane. We have staff members Carly Johnson, Robert Wenner, Corporation Counsel Martha Mahoney, and then from the mayor's office we have Chris Ellis, John Riley, and from administrative services we have Miriam Dixon. And we also have Council President Kelly Kimbrough present. Did I miss anybody? No? Okay. So on our agenda this evening is a discussion of Local Law I of 2026, a local law amending the charter of the City of Albany in relation to clarifying and revising requirements related to budget transfers after the adoption of budget. We will also be discussing the City of Albany budget in general. I believe we want to start with Local Law I. As I just stated, Local Law I of 2026 is a local law amending the charter of the City of Albany in relation to clarifying and revising requirements related to budget transfers after the adoption of budget. And just briefly, the council amended the Board of Estimate and Apportionment in 2021. We made two sort of legislative changes, one, ensured representation on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, and the second provided a definition and clarification of what a budget transfer actually encompassed. There has been some disagreement over what constitutes a budget transfer and moves us towards that 4%, which would require council oversight and authorization. And local law I further clarifies the definition and intent of those previous legislative changes. Members of the Common Council should have received memoranda from both Corporation Council and our Research Council. So I wanted to sort of provide an opportunity for both attorneys to identify the concerns that they have so that we can talk through them. And then I'll kick things over to committee members for questions or comments if that works for everyone. So either of you can go ahead and start. Rock, paper, scissors it.
Okay. So, good evening. Thank you, Council Member. My name is Martha Mahoney. I'm a Senior Assistant Corporation Counsel for the Law Department here. And I first want to just level set the perspective that I'm coming here with, and it's the role that the Office of Corporation Counsel is serving in this instance. Okay. 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 All right, can you hear me? No. Thank you, Council Member. So the role that the Office of Corporation Counsel is serving in this instance is counsel to the entire city and the Common Council and protecting the city from litigation. So the input that's provided is pursuant to my office's authority under New York State Second-Class Cities Law, Section 201. So I reviewed proposed local law I closely, and it's the legal opinion of the Office of Corporation Counsel that this proposed local law curtails the powers of elected officials in two ways. And the first way is that the proposed local law I adds an additional class of monies, appropriations greater than 4% of the total city budget for which the Common Council must give prior approval before the Board of E&A may act. It curtails the mayor's authority to shape and act on an executive budget, a budget already adopted by the Common Council. This would require the mayor's adopted budget to get a majority of Common Council approval twice. Since the mayor is an elected official, curtailment of her authority triggers a mandatory referendum under New York State Municipal Home Rule Law, Section 23(2)(f). And the second curtailment of power in the proposed local law I is curtailment of the E&A board powers, which is a board of elected officials. Local law I adds new categories of transactions, one being debt service or debt reserve funds or accounts, and two, funds of any amount from any given fiscal year for which the Common Council must give prior approval before the Board of E&A may act. This curtails the power of the board, a board of elected officials, which triggers a mandatory referendum under New York State Municipal Home Rule Law, Section 23(2)(f). There's case law from Orange County, which was affirmed by the New York State Appellate Division for the Second Department, and also affirmed by the Court of Appeals.
I just want to note a point of clarification. The Common Council does not have the authority to vote down the mayor's proposed budget in our charter. We can't vote a budget down.
But the Common Council has the power to amend the mayor's presented budget, and that process happens in the fall of the year prior.
We have limited authority to amend the budget, extremely limited authority to amend the budget.
Additionally, for purposes of local law I, the appropriations in question are those that are being approved or disapproved by the E&A board, and so inherently would not be included in the budget passed in the previous year.
I don't think that's clear as it's currently written, and that's one way in which that the local law would trigger a mandatory referendum.
even though we're just, this local law is clarifying a local law that was passed in 2021 that did not need a referendum, and it is just it's clarifying it to the intent of what that local law in 2021 was. And so you still think, despite the fact that everyone thought, including the previous administration, that this was the interpretation, you think that it now requires a referendum?
Yes, and I think the
So why? Because it didn't before. And this is just literally what the intent was before, that was thought of by the mayor, by Corporation Council, and by the Common Council. So this is literally what 2021 was, which did not require a referendum.
right, and so I'm not opining on the local law from 2021, but
But I think you kind of need to, because this is the law of that is the same law.
it's not the same law. Respectfully, this law
It is though, because it's the intent. We have documented evidence of it.
I have reviewed the evidence, and I believe the evidence is that's extensively quoted by former council member Richard Conti, who's not an attorney. And even in one of his quotes, he says, "The adoption of these two local laws from 2021, while seemingly technical in nature, represents significant amendments to the Albany City Charter and strengthen the Common Council's oversight authority with regard to budget amendments and expenditure of funds." In that instance, he is
But that didn't require a referendum, just to note.
Also, just in the interest of clarity on that point, he's referring to multiple local laws there, one of which changed the composition of the E&A board. It was a separate local law passed at the same time as the local law regarding what transfers of funds are subject to E&A approval.
Which also didn't require a referendum, correct?
Neither of those required a referendum at the time,
Right.
and everyone at the
So
time
it seems
agreed
weird that
the change to
now,
the composition of
suddenly.
the E&A board was a separate matter and a more substantial change than the change to the language around what was under the purview of the E&A board.
And again, I want to just level set the perspective that I'm coming here as a legal advisor, providing legal advice to the Common Council, that it is this body's, you can choose to accept or reject this advice, but I'm saying that it would be subject to litigation. And I think that the local law in 2021, it included budget transfers after the budget was passed. This, as presented, one aspect of proposed local law I adds appropriations that doesn't specify when those appropriations would be made or allocated. It could include, as written, it could include appropriations that the council would have already voted on in the mayor's presented budget in the year prior. So the mayor could present a budget in October that includes appropriations that could equal 4% of the total budget, and the council would have reviewed and acted on the entire budget in that fall.
How would those appropriations go through E&A?
Just,
They
just really
wouldn't
quick.
go through E&A.
Yeah.
That's what you're suggesting literally couldn't happen.
So as it's written, I
But no,
think
no,
that it
no,
provides
it's,
I
some-
think, just really quick, because I wanted to ask this question too, as relates to
Right.
that. I feel like we're talking about two separate things, right? Like budget appropriations, and then after the budget passed, that's something I want to clarify, right?
Right.
So, local law intent for me, I would believe, is all transfers after the appropriation, after the budget. So we're not trying to amend the mayor's budget. We're trying to amend, for E&A transfers to come in front of the council after the budget passes. Does that require a referendum if we're asking for that information?
That should be clarified in the writing, or in how the statute is proposed. But I will say that the local law also adds additional classes of monies, including any transfer or appropriation of funds involving the city's debt service or debt reserve funds or accounts. That's a whole new class of money that would be coming before the council. It would require majority of the Common Council approval before going to E&A.
Okay, so just
That
really
is a
quick,
curtailment.
on that topic,
I-
Darius.
When those exceed 4%, so what we're referring to is the running tally of what is coming through the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. And when you look at the Board of Estimate and Apportionment currently, there are two categories. One category is transfers and one category is appropriations. And I can't tell you why things are called an appropriation and not an appropriation, particularly when they're involved in moving money to a budgeted line item. And in my opinion, it was the intent of the council that all of those movements of funds in the changes that were made in 2021 should have been counted towards the 4%. They are currently not counted towards the 4%. And what this is proposing to do is to ensure that whether we call it an appropriation or whether we call it a transfer, it still adds up to the 4%. And in looking at the Board of Estimate and Apportionment and the movement of money between 2022 and 2025, so 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, when you account for both what was moved in appropriations and moved in budgeted transfers, we exceeded that 4% every single year. And the council's intent was to ensure that if there were significant fiscal issues requiring that we move significant amounts of money around in order to cover what we needed to cover in terms of expenses in the city, that there would be clear notification and public discussion about what was happening, and that did not occur. And this bill is proposed to address that issue and ensure that those definitions are clear, and that, for example, the December 2nd transfer of $6.4 million that went from our debt reserves in order to cover salary expenses and health insurance in the city, that the council would have received full notification and not just an email that goes out to 75 people in the city.
Thank you, Councilmember and Chair. And to answer also the Councilmember Anani's question, yes, it still would be a curtailment of the Board of E&A's powers for appropriations to have to obtain Common Council approval, appropriations over 4%, to obtain majority approval of the Common Council before the Board of E&A can act, as well as any transfer appropriation of funds involving the city's debt service or debt reserve funds or accounts.
But that already exists in statute. They already require our authorization for expenditures exceeding 4% in statute.
All transfers of budgeted funds that exceed 4% of total annual city budget. So adding one, appropriations, adding two, any transfer or appropriation of funds involving
I'm
the
going to
city's.
tell you right now that the definition that was passed in 2021 was crystal clear about what a budgeted transfer is, and what we have been classifying as an appropriation should have constituted as a budgeted transfer. I do not believe that the mayor's office or the auditor's office was following city statute for those years. If we want to have a really long public discussion and a full referendum on that, we absolutely can. I don't think that that's necessarily where we want to go with this, but the council is in fully committed to ensuring that these protections are in place going forward.
And if respectfully, Chair, I want to say, taking politics completely out of it, a cold reading of how this local law is proposed would be a curtailment of powers of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, which is a board of elected officials. So regardless of the politics today, tomorrow, in 10 years, if there's a different chief executive, if there's a different council pro tempore, different council president who are all elected members on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, they could absolutely sue the city saying that this local law is null and void and seek declaratory judgment declaring that so.
Can I ask what test you're applying to determine whether an elected official has had their power curtailed by a given local law?
So yes, the statute that I've cited as New York State Municipal Home Rule Law, Section 23(2)(f).
No, yeah, I understand where in municipal home rule law it states that a referendum is necessary for any local law curtailing the power of an elected official, but the case law is pretty clear that not any law that impacts requirements or the exercise of power by elected officials is considered a curtailment or a transfer or an abolition, I think is the third category. The case law discusses changes to the structural framework of municipal government. I'm just trying to nail down what makes this a curtailment of power versus the local law we passed last year. The charter amendment that Member Conti sponsored last year, requiring Corporation Council sign off on every law passed by the Common Council, or the Violence Prevention Commission being relocated and its membership reconstituted earlier this year, which would have removed the chair of public safety from that commission. No one here had any concerns about that, because I think that everyone understands that a curtailment is above a certain threshold of change to the power of an elected official. And I know courts have defined that in terms of changes to structural governance frameworks. I'm just curious what test we're applying that would make this substantively different from previous local laws.
So I think a curtailment is also a diminishment of power, and a law curtailing the powers of a board composed of elected officials must be submitted to the electorate, just as if the power of a single officer were abridged. And there is case law, valid case law to today's date, that supports that notion.
Right, but what extent of diminishment? I mean, I think that reasonable minds might differ on whether there's a diminishment here at all. We're adding an additional requirement prior to the exercise of power, but we're not removing any power that could be exercised in a world where local law is passed.
But that
I'm trying
inherently
to determine.
diminishes the board's power. If an additional level or layer of approval is required before the Board of E&A can act, that diminishes the Board of E&A's powers.
Right. The chair of the Public Safety Committee's power was diminished when he was removed from the Violence Prevention Commission by a local law passed earlier this year. Do you agree?
I don't have that local law in front of me. I have the local law that we're discussing today, proposed local law I, and I have the case law and statutory law backing up my position.
Okay.
Corporation Council has reviewed every law that we have passed, correct? This year.
I imagine so, yes.
And this particular issue was not raised for the law that Research Council is raising.
Correct.
I think that answers the question.
Right. I understand you don't have it in front of you. I can tell you that earlier this year, the Public Safety Chair was removed from the Violence Prevention Commission as part of a reconstitution, a reorganization, while it was moved under a new office. No concerns were raised about curtailing Member Hoey's power at that time. And I think that I maintain that stance. I think that's reasonable. I think that that is not a power inherent to his position as a member of the Common Council.
Yeah, I would. It's not inherent to his power or duties of an elected official and as chair of the Public Safety Committee or chair of the Public Safety Committee for the Common Council, but that's in the same way of removing the Corporation Council from the Board of E&A in 2021.
I agree. I don't think a referendum was necessary to remove the Corporation Council from the E&A board in 2021. But I'm trying to determine where you draw a line between a diminishment of power that does not rise to the level of curtailment and a diminishment of power that constitutes a curtailment.
The local law that changed the chair of the Public Safety Committee from being part of the Violence Prevention Task Force did not curtail the chair of the Public Safety Committee's abilities to opine on, not opine, but to act in some way on public safety matters or curtail the Public Safety Committee's abilities to do something before it acted or require a second body to review the Public Safety Committee's abilities to act on something before it acted.
How is that different from any elected official being in addition to the responsibilities inherent to their position, being added to the E&A board?
Because this proposed local law I is saying that the Board of E&A cannot act on certain applications or matters before it until a majority of the Common Council has approved the matter.
So is your position that if a member of the E&A board were removed from membership, that wouldn't be a curtailment of their power?
I would have to look at that exact proposal.
Okay.
I've given the Office of Corporation Counsel and the Law Department has given their firm position that this would be subject to a mandatory referendum. So it's the Common Council's power to take that advice into consideration.
Yeah, can I just have a few more follow-up questions?
Yeah.
So with this interpretation, you believe that Corporation Council was incorrect in 2021 in their assessment that that law should not have gone to a referendum? Because this is not as far, this is literally a clarification of that law, so that law was actually much stronger than this one. This is just a clarification
I-
that we already thought was law.
Yeah, I don't have that local law in
So
front of
yes
me.
or no?
I don't have that local law in front of me, and that's not a fair question to ask me.
It is a totally fair question to ask, but if you can't answer it, that's fine.
Okay, I'm happy to
just
follow
a
up.
quick, couple
I'm
more
happy to provide
questions.
follow up in writing as to that question.
That would be great, thank you. So also, just out of curiosity, who exactly would be suing on this? Like, I'm just curious, who's gonna be suing over this? Because
So-
I cannot for the life of me figure out who would bring a lawsuit over this and why. If you could answer that, that'd be great.
So it could be anyone withstanding, any city resident could sue over this, and as mentioned before, it could be.
But why? Well, like, why
I-
would, I don't see why anybody would sue over this. And you, in order to say that you're at risk for litigation, there has to be a reason why somebody would sue. And so without a why, I don't see how we're at risk. Just because somebody could sue over literally anything. Like, they could sue because they don't like the color of City Hall. It doesn't mean the lawsuit's gonna go anywhere, but that is literally something that could happen. So just because somebody could sue about something doesn't mean that you're actually at risk for litigation. There has to be a real reason why they would sue that makes sense, and I cannot see that. So I understand that anybody could sue over this, anybody could sue over anything. What is the reason why someone actually would?
'Cause the proposed law as drafted is facially defective and would be inoperable. That
But
would be
why would somebody, I mean, and why does the last law that we already passed, why nobody sued over that? And so following your logic, that law was also factually, it would be just as bad, if not worse, and no one has sued and nobody's even talked about suing. So I fail to see any lawsuit risk here. I mean, it's just, you're not presenting things in any way that makes sense.
And I think in 10 years from now, if there was a different council president, a different president pro tempore, a different auditor, a different mayor, any treasurer, any of the elected officials who are on the board of ENA, if any of the relationships were different, any of those individuals could sue the city saying that the law is null and void and ask for a declaratory judgment.
Why? Like, could you come up with any example?
For the reason being that their powers to act had been curtailed.
So they haven't minded for the last 4 years, but suddenly in 10 years, they're going to mind for some reason.
In what way does local law I open us up to the potential for litigation that we are not already on this view open to based on the 2021 amendments to the charter?
Because it's still at a proposed, the legislation is still proposed at this point, and there's still time to correct it, to add that it would be subject to a mandatory referendum.
But if we understand that in 2021, and I understand that factually we may disagree on this, but I think that in 2021 the sponsor, the Common Council, the then mayor, and the public, if this Times Union article is to be believed, all agreed that appropriations were going to be considered transfers under the language used in this section. Then in what way does clarifying that now open us up to litigation that we would not already be concerned about for 2021's charter amendment?
The local law does more than that. It also adds any transfer or appropriation of funds involving the city's debt service or debt reserve funds or accounts, and any transfer or appropriation pertaining to a given fiscal year that comes before the board. And
That
any
again
subsequent-
further is to clarify the existing definition that already, from our perspective and from our intent, included all of those things.
Looking exclusively at the
I'm-
addition of the appropriations language is,
I mean-
is what I'm trying to get at here.
I just have a question about ENA being sued. The treasurer took money out sometime between March and May to pay, I think it was roughly about $10 million. Wasn't that under cutting the ENA's authorities? They did not sue the treasurer then. And it seems like I'm just a little bit concerned because, again, this is more about transparency and accountability. When transfers are being made after the budget passed, if it's more than 4%, and residents, I believe the council need to know, especially when we're in challenging times, as relates to understanding and reviewing how this money is being made. If they just add another oversight on top of ENA, I just don't see any problem with this one. I really, and as relates to going to a referendum, maybe it does need to go to referendum and let residents make a decision on this. And I know that there's a lot that was said. What specifically can you point to that makes it go to that triggers a referendum?
So because the Board of Estimate and Apportionment is a board of elected officials, this adding the additional categories of monies to adding additional categories of monies that would require the Common Council, majority of the Common Council's approval before the Board of ENA could act would be a curtailment of the board's powers, a board of elected officials. And New York State Municipal Home Rule Law says that any curtailment, transfer, or abolishment of an elected official's powers would require a mandatory referendum.
And to clarify, at the moment, you don't have any view on the threshold above which a diminishment of power becomes a curtailment?
I don't know how else to answer the question other than providing the, I don't mean this, I mean this completely plainly, but other than providing the plain language of a curtailment is a diminishment of power. And this is, the proposed local law would diminishes the Board of ENA's powers to act in certain categories of money because it would require the majority of Common Council approval before the Board of ENA can act.
So, it looked like you were about to say something else, Bobby, so we'll. Just out of curiosity, so before this was added to our packet to go out, you were requested to have at least 5 different times on your thoughts on referendum or no. We did not believe there was a need for a referendum. We've articulated why. If you thought that this was so important, why didn't you respond to any of those requests?
Respectfully, I did not receive 5 requests, but I did.
Yes, you did. We have it documented. So let's move on from back and forth with that. You did. We have it documented, and we can. Why didn't you respond?
Okay, I would love to see that documentation of 5 requests. Anecdotally, this was discussed in a meeting with council staff about 6 weeks ago that I shared that this may trigger a referendum.
On April 20th.
And I was kind of laughed at. And
we also
providing this
discussed it in a
writing-
public
I'm sorry?
meeting. We also discussed it at a public finance committee meeting.
And shortly thereafter, as I mentioned about 6 weeks ago, I anecdotally mentioned to council staff that this could trigger a referendum. And providing this in writing, I provided it as soon as I was able to.
So, okay, that's not the information that I have, but.
I'm sorry?
And I will say, I don't have any problem with us going to referendum on this. I think the citizens of the city of Albany would happily vote for this. And I don't see an issue with that. However, I mean, I think that your arguments are tenuous at best. And while I'm not an attorney, I do write laws for a living and I negotiate them. So I'm very, very familiar with the legal system. And I think I've done it I know I've done it for about 15 years now. So I'm pretty good with laws. So let's not go down the road because Richard did it for 30 years. And I know he wasn't an attorney, but also very good. He wrote laws for 30 years, so pretty solid on laws. I know that he was not an attorney, but that does not mean that his analysis and interpretation of his own law does not matter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
I'm very sorry if it came across that way. That was not. I'm only saying that this information
It definitely
was provided.
came across that way, and
I apologize. I totally didn't mean to. I'm saying that this information was provided as the Office of Corporation Counsel's role as legal advisor to the Common Council. That's solely it if the Common Council does not want to take the advice.
Just for a question, and I'm not on the finance committee, but if there was an amendment that you wanted to make as relates to local law I, do you have one in mind or like it's just, I know if Alfredo was here, we'd talk a little bit more about compromise. What do you see, what amendment do you think needs to be added to local law I?
Sorry, or is there another way we can address the intent of this legislation? I think you understand the intent of where it's coming from. I also am not on finance committee, but, you know, to follow up, like, is there another way that we could approach this to solve the problem and meet the intent?
I'm sure that additional conversations can absolutely be had.
I mean, in general, when there is an issue around language that Corporation Council has raised, they provide recommended language and substantive changes for us and the committee to consider. That hasn't occurred here.
There is an enclosure to the memorandum that does add suggested edits, and I'll also just again point that happy to suggest additional edits in the future, but there are some edits suggested as enclosed to the memo.
While people are looking at that, just to circle back to a conversation that was happening earlier, and obviously I don't anticipate you to have a clear answer on this in the moment. That's not what I'm asking for. You don't have Lexis open in front of you. I happen to. But the case you cited regarding the curtailment of power was from 1946. The only reference it contains to a board of elected officials dates back to a case from 1926, so 100 years old now. I've got a case open in front of me from 2007. I'm not trying to say that the case you were citing isn't still good law. I don't necessarily think that's the case. But certainly the tests around this have been refined a bit since then. I'm looking at Mayor of the City of New York versus the Council of the City of New York from June 2007, which states that the requirement of a referendum for legislation that curtails any power of an elective officer must be read as applicable only to legislation that impairs a power conferred on the officer as part of the framework of local government. As a general rule, a law that merely regulates the operations of city government, in this case it was about collective bargaining or in some other area, is not a curtailment of an officer's power. Goes on to read that the mayor's power in this case was unimpaired by the local laws in question.
Can you repeat the part about the collective bargaining? Because I think that is very relevant as to what power was curtailed.
I don't think there's anything in here about the fact pattern. That's in a different section of the case that I don't have in front of me. As a general rule, a law that merely regulates the operations of city government in collective bargaining or in some other area is not a curtailment of an officer's power. I'm looking at
I don't see that as
a power conferred on the officer as part of the framework of local government. And I'm trying to just drill down into whether it is your view that the ability to approve an appropriation above 4% in the aggregate of the city's budget for a given fiscal year without the public transparency of coming in front of the council or without a council vote to approve is an inherent power as part of the mayor's or the auditor's or the treasurer's or council members' position in the framework of local government?
So that's a very long question. I do think that this is not analogous regarding.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
So you're saying that it would be a curtailment to legislation that impairs a power conferred on the officer as part of the framework of local government?
Well, I'm not saying that. The Court of Appeals was. I'm asking what
No,
you see as the threshold
yeah.
between a regulation of an operation of city government and an impairment of the framework of city government, which seems to be the relevant test as to whether a power has been curtailed.
The elected officials who sit on the board of ENA, it would be the powers that are I guess, embedded in to those elected officials that allow them to sit on the board of ENA, and would be curtailing those powers.
It would not curtail their ability to sit on the board of ENA. They would still be on the board of ENA. It also
Or
would,
for the board to act. Only that impairs the power conferred on the officer as part of the framework of local government.
so
I have to give more thought to this.
understood completely. The question that I'm asking, and that you can put an answer in writing for if you'd like, is whether it remains the position of your office that the added requirement that certain appropriations after the 4% threshold has been reached are subject to public transparency and a vote of the Common Council is an impairment of the framework of the mayor's position in local government.
Will it be all of the board of ENA members' positions?
I agree.
in
Your
local
memo
government?
referenced the mayor in that paragraph. But yes, the mayor or the auditor or the treasurer or the pro tem or the president of the Common Council.
I guess it'd be what powers within those positions, what are the powers inherent in those positions that make it appropriate that they are the members who sit on the board of ENA? There must be something in their inherent powers as auditor, as mayor, as treasurer.
Well, as recently as 2021, the composition of the ENA board was different. It used to include the Corporation Council. I believe there were other non-elected appointed city officials that had sat on ENA in the past.
Correct.
But I'll defer to Councilman.
Correct. The council did not have, I think it was only the Common Council president that had representation on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. So one of the amendments that was passed in 2021 was to allow for the president pro tempore and or their appointee to serve on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, which subsequently has, the president pro tempore's appointee has become the finance chair, and in lieu of the finance chair has become council staff if there is no one available. So we increased representation of the Common Council on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, therefore curtailing the powers and diluting the votes of the mayor's office, the auditor's office, and the treasurer's office without having to go to referendum in 2021.
So again, I don't expect you to have an answer to this on the spot. I only had time to pull this up because members were asking questions. But at some point, I think it would be very helpful to the council if we could get a written opinion from your office on what test is appropriate to apply to local laws in the future to determine if an elected official's power has been curtailed. And I think that that's going to be rooted in this distinction between regulating operations of city government and impairing the framework of city government.
Thank you so much. Can you please follow up in writing with a precise question, if
Yeah,
that's okay?
absolutely.
Thank you.
So the one recommended amendment that I don't have an issue with, because I don't think it subjectively changes any component of the legislation, for paragraph B, Corporation Council recommended that we add in, again, I mean, this is referenced multiple times, that this is in reference to transfers of budgeted funds within the fiscal year. But in section B, Corporation Council has recommended adding the word fiscal in the first sentence. So all transfers and portions of budgeted funds that exceed 4% of the total annual city budget in any given, the amendment would be fiscal, the word fiscal year. By a show of hands, does anybody have concerns about making that amendment to this legislation? No? By a show of hands, because we're moving on 7 o'clock and we also wanted to discuss the city budget, do we want to table this for further discussion, or do we want to move this evening?
So, Councilmember Keegan, I personally would like to make a motion to move this through the committee with a positive recommendation. It is not just that this was the intent of the law that was passed in 2021, but it is also, and it's not just that we voted on the 2026 budget when we expected that there were red flags that would go up from the intent of this legislation that did not happen. And I will say, I don't think that those red flags didn't happen for any malicious reason or anything like that. I think that it was a shift that we didn't know. I think there's a lot of things that people didn't know what they didn't know. I think this clarification helps solve the problem that we voted on a budget while there was a tremendous structural deficit that was not widely known. And even worse, a new administration came in to a financial disaster without red flags that should have been waving so that they had some idea. And I think that that's not okay. And as I said, I don't have a problem with going to referendum for it. I'm happy to talk about all of this to the public. I think the public would happily vote on it, and I think they would happily love the discussion, but I don't think we need to, because we didn't need to in 2021, and I don't see any reason to hold this up. I think it is fiscally irresponsible to not make sure that the alarm bells that we thought were in place are appropriately in place and are there for all future elected officials, so all of us are operating in an appropriate manner to make sure that this does not happen again. I don't think it's okay. So I am going to make a motion to move this through committee with a positive recommendation with the amendment of adding in subsection B, fiscal, to the second line, so it's any given fiscal year.
Do I have a second on that motion? Second from Councilmember Lumpkin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Just give me a second to motion. I just like to make sure I have my own notes in case staff misses something. Second, Lumpkin. Okay. Thank you for that. We are going to move on to, and I would like to invite Chris Ellis, Deputy Mayor Ellis, Commissioner Dixon, and Counsel to the Mayor's Office, John Riley, up. Please feel free to take over any mics in the audience. You don't have to squish into one desk to discuss the city's budget. I just don't want you guys to have to like shift the microphone around and around to answer questions. And I don't know if you guys had prepared remarks, but there were a couple things as chair that I wanted to touch on because we've had some significant movement on our current fiscal situation since the last time the committee met. First and foremost, that we were awarded, I believe, $20 million in additional funds from the state for fiscal year 2026, and as I understand it, that will be a 3-year recurring fund. I was hoping that we could get a report out from you folks on how that changes our current picture, particularly with regards to the proposed cuts that had been communicated to us before. I know I personally also have some follow-up questions on the responses that were submitted to us, some things that didn't necessarily have the full detail I was hoping to receive. As well as questions, if we are going to proceed with the proposed cuts still going forward, I do have some line item questions as to what that actually means, because again, those proposed cuts did not really come with any detail as to what those actually look like in terms of impact to the city. So please feel free to start out, and then I will turn things over to the committee to ask any additional questions.
Good evening. Members of the Common Council, Council President, Finance Committee Chair, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity for us to be here tonight to discuss. First off, I want to note the successful partnership between local and state in achieving this record-setting additional funding for the next 3 years. That is no small feat, and we appreciate the partnership of this body and our other intergovernmental partners in making that happen. Thank you. There's a question about, does that change the spending reduction plans that the mayor and administrative services have put into place this year? And I will say no. We've been very clear that this does not mean that we can take the foot off the gas. The additional funding for 2026 gives the administration the needed breathing room to reset and recalibrate, but we cannot act as if business is normal or business is as usual again and put ourselves in the same precarious financial footing as we found ourselves in earlier this year. The spending controls will stay in place until further notice. We've been clear with our departments that although we received this additional aid, that does not change how they should conduct business moving forward.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to say on the record that I missed before we get started with questions? No? Okay.
I would, apologies, council member. I would just note we're also thrilled to be bringing on Bob Ward, who I think many in this room know personally, is an expert in the field. He has literally written the book on some of this stuff. He will be joining the city as a temporary part-time employee starting later this month. We are grateful to have his expertise and guidance as we navigate this process and look forward to having him on board. I'm sure he will be looking forward to speaking with members of this body at some point.
Okay. So I just wanted to start out for members of the committee. I'm going to start out with looking at the proposed cuts that you put forth. For administrative services, you propose cutting $145,561 roughly in salaries. Do we know what that actually entails? Are those current vacancies? Do we know what vacancies they are?
All of the proposed salary line cuts are vacant.
Yes, Councilmember Powell.
Yes, thank you. Does that include the budget director position?
No.
It does not. Okay, thank you.
So do you know specifically what titles we're going to leave vacant in that office?
I do not.
Is it possible for us to get a detailed list of what titles will remain vacant across all departments for those vacant items?
We can do that.
Okay. My next question is in relation to the fire department, their contracted services line. I just want to note for the general public, our fire department's operating budget, so that's all of their expenses that are not tied into salary and health benefits is roughly around 7%. They're probably the leanest department we have. So I was a little concerned when I saw that we're pulling out of whatever's left of their operating expenses. So do we know specifically what is in relation to those contracted services?
I can't say specifically what they are without the information in front of me, but what we do know is that the fire chief and his team went through their budget and looked at each of their actual contracted services and the signed contracts and determined that this was an overage in
Okay.
those lines. So it's not a cut to any contract.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, you know, because, for example, in those operating expenses are things like prescription medications that EMS carries to perform life-saving care, and I would not want to see us pulling from those kinds of funds in order to make a budget gap, because that potentially could impact public welfare. The same thing for APD. There's almost $500,000 in contracted expenses included in this. Do we know specifically what they were cutting?
A large portion of that number is for cleaning services
Okay.
that the APD has a contract for. So we also have custodial staff at the police department. So the intent is to fill the custodial positions and remove the cleaning contract.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Let's see, and so the rest of my questions on this really have to do with the salary positions included in various departments. So if we could get an itemized list of department by department what positions are not going to go unfilled, that would be very helpful to know. So moving on from there.
I'm sorry, could you
do we have
clarify
any-
that request?
Yep.
You said an itemized list of what positions
Yeah,
will not
we
go
would
unfilled?
just like to know, you said that when we look down this list of all the salary savings that are included in this list, department by department, those are currently all vacant items that are going to go unfilled, that we're planning not to backfill. We would just like to know what those items are.
Okay, so the ones
So
that
that we
will
have an
be going
understanding of,
unfilled.
you know, is this a firefighter that we're cutting in AFD? Is it administrative staff that we're cutting? You know, for corporation counsel, are we, I think my other clarifying question was that we already said that we were forfeiting a council position to cover another budgetary expense, so I'm assuming there are additional vacancies that we are going to forego in that department?
That's correct.
Okay. Are there any other questions that I didn't cover? Councilmember Brody.
In addition to the line item detail, I think it would be helpful to understand a bit more about the contractual numbers as well. They're pretty substantial. I think one of the things we as a city are struggling with is overtime in general. And so if we're doing something like reducing a contract for outside cleaning services, I'd want to make sure we're not inadvertently increasing janitorial staff overtime or anything like that as well. And just understanding a bit more of how that cut will be operationalized, I think, in starting with what the nature of the contract is, would be helpful. So basically the same level of detail that Councilmember Keegan was asking for each salaried line item for the contracted services as well. And then is it fair to assume that these line items will be proposed at these lower levels than when we're talking about the 2027 budget, if they're recurring?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Oh, I think the intention in 2027 when we're talking staffing is to look at the overall city staffing. So it may not be the exact lines, but as we are going through and as a part of our budget process requiring each department to do workforce planning, that could shake out differently. I think bottom line numbers will remain the same, but I don't know that when we're talking workforce planning, looking at retirements that may be coming up and things like that, it will remain the exact same positions.
Sorry, there's a bit of distraction behind you. To get back to the matter at hand, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that flexibility in the overall number is important. Then I would just request that we're not talking about recurring savings by specific line items, because I think that could be misconstrued. For example, if, admin services have a salaries saving of $1,400 145,000 and change, if that's going to be in a sort of a larger pool, we should be classifying as that not as a recurring saving in that exact line item going forward.
I think it will be in the admin services pool. So within that department, the number is recurring. The positions that I give you a list of may not remain the same when we look at it again as a whole for 2027.
Okay. So I think we're saying the same thing differently.
And I will just note that typically when we get the budget, if we're cutting a position in one department to create a position in another department, you will see in the year to year that reduction and what that reduction equaled in terms of the budgeted costs in one department, and it will appear in another department. So for example, there were some positions that moved from, I believe it was admin services to engineering this year, and you could clearly see the reduction in the admin services staffing and the increase in staffing in engineering to see that that money didn't change. It just moved from one department to another.
I have questions about other elements of the budget, but I want to make sure people, if you'd like us to stay on this.
Yeah, I was
topic
going to
first.
go document by document if that works for you. So does anybody have questions about the proposed cuts that we have not asked yet?
I just have a
Councilmember Powell.
Thank you, Councilmember Keegan. I just have a general question about the cuts. So as somebody who gets calls every day about grass in parks not being mowed and sprinkler pads not being on and potholes still not filled and the variety of things like that, I'm just wondering if there's been any assessment or any plan of assessment about city services and the impact of the cuts that they have on city services, that are serving our tax base, right? So I think I appreciate greatly that the administration has taken the initiative to make cuts because we were in kind of a dire budget situation. It's great that we got the state money, and I appreciate you still wanting to cut, but I think there's a right sizing of cuts with services that can be evaluated, right, and fine-tuned. So I was just wondering if there's any plan, like what is your plan to do that, and when are you planning to do it? Any information you can share about that?
You used the word "were" when you described the budget, which is past tense. I would change and make a slight amendment to say "are," meaning that if we don't actively participate in this, we will be sitting here next year in the same misery. I think from the leadership meeting that we had Friday, that was probably the first time we heard mention of some of the residual things that have happened since we have implemented the cut actions. Our goal with the cut actions was to have minimal service interruption, but there is a period of adjustment. If folks are getting constituent calls, we need there to be the next step to either reach out, and I think we mentioned this to President Pro Tem Farrell, to reach out to DGS. Hey, the grass is too high. Please come cut. I made a call. I drove past the bowl at Lincoln Park. The grass looked too high. DGS, what's the schedule? I didn't even say come cut it. I said, hey, what is the schedule for the cutting of grass of Lincoln Park? I'm not sure. We'll look into it. I drove home that afternoon. Grass was cut. So I think because there are some people doing a little more, some people doing a little stuff that they may not have done, there's a period of adjustment, and any help that we can get from you all as you receive your calls from constituents will be very, very helpful as we try to manage our way through this. Absolutely.
Could I do a just quick follow-up process question with that? Just because I think sometimes when we're getting calls from constituents, it's not something that anybody would necessarily think to bring up to leadership or anything like that. But is this an appropriate role for them to flag it for Liz to say that, and people are welcome to bring it up to leadership too. We're always happy to carry that into leadership meetings, but it might just be something where it's a quick, hey, FYI, I'm starting to get a bunch of calls about this, just as a flag. Because we also go through a process of, I always tell my constituents, report it on SeeClickFix, and then if that doesn't get anything, then I circle it back. But, so I think we all have a process that we kind of do, but to your point, you guys might not know if we're getting a bunch of different hits on something, and to kind of say, oh, FYI, I'm getting a bunch of calls on whatever.
Any other questions on that particular document from the committee? So next, I want to move on to the June 1 report issued out with essentially the answers to a lot of the revenue questions that we had. I only had a couple of questions, so I'll start with mine and then I'll leave it to the rest of the committee. So question 10, which is I think on page 4. This is in relation to DEC aid, which from the revenue count documentation that I had around March, it showed that we were short. And you guys said as of May 29th, 2026, you've gotten full payment. So does that imply that additional revenue came in since March?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question?
So for question number 10, please provide any additional detail on the shortfall in DEC aid revenue. Do we expect this to come in? Please confirm all necessary documentation was submitted for payment. And the response was, as of May 29th, 2026, the city has received full payment for Department of Environmental Conservation aid. So did we receive additional funding between March and May?
We did.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was correct in how I was reading that answer. And then if we skip ahead to, sorry, most of these were relatively well detailed. Question number 47, this is in relation to the Homeland Security grant funding that didn't reach anticipated levels. The response that we got from you was that this was a grant associated with a 4-year period. The spending period began September 21st and ended August 31st, 2025. 72,000 was unexpended at the close of the grant. And you said as of June 1st, there remains $297,118 available, excuse me, to be expended from the 2023 award prior to the close of the relevant spend period of August 31st, 2026. Can you provide some context as to what happened there? Like, were we not engaged in the activity that we needed to engage in order to bill for that funding? Because it seems like a significant amount for that long of a grant period. That seems like a significant amount of funds that we have remaining to spend down in just a few short months.
I can request detailed information from the police department on why the $72,700 was left unexpended.
Okay. Well, this reads that it looks like there's $72,700, but then you said there's $297,118 available to be expended. So that reads as if there's another almost $300,000 that we haven't spent down.
That's correct.
Okay. So in total, it's almost $400,000 or $470,000 roughly that we didn't spend on that grant. And so it just, again,
Well, I don't know that the $297,118 will not be expended by the close of the August 31, 2026 grant period.
Okay.
It's still a high chance, according to the police department, that they will get very close to that number.
Okay.
So we could wait and see where they land before making the call that they didn't expend that amount. The $72,700, the grant has closed, the period to spend has closed, so that we can get information on what the details were around why it didn't happen.
I'm just interested to know what specific activity we were supposed to be performing, how that was supposed to be billed, and sort of what happened there. I mean, sometimes it doesn't make sense for us to necessarily perform all of those activities, but it
Happy to get the
provided
clarification.
detail, but not the full detail of what was going on in there.
We'll find
if
out.
that makes any sense. And then moving on to question number 4. And I'm going in the order which you gave them to us, John, sorry.
No.
Which was not in the order of the questions. So this is the AG opioid funding. Essentially, we got these funds, we contracted, we did a joint grant to CARES with Albany County to do street engagement of our unhoused population and assist with navigation to treatment services, to kind of both help to alleviate the rising numbers of people who are unhoused in the community, and also to address what we've all been seeing in terms of folks who have really significant substance abuse issues that are engaging with the public throughout the city. And it appears, I wasn't aware that we changed any of the activities involved in that grant, but based upon the response that we received from you all, the reason why we did not receive those funds is that they don't ally, the expenses don't ally with what those funds can be used for. So I was hoping to get some more clarification on how that happened, because they seem to align for a number of years and now they're out of whack, and I don't understand what we changed between 2024 and 2025.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember. So, can't speak for the previous administration or budget director. With the various opioid litigation settlements, condition of the settlement is that the funds have to be used towards treatment and preventative measures for opioid-related issues. That settlement number has been inconsistent. I think we are at the very end of funding through the various opioid lawsuits. So, unfortunately, I think in the early years of the program, the settlements were coming in at that $300,000 number that covered our portion of the CARES agreement. The last couple of years, unfortunately, for circumstances outside the city's control, those numbers have been less. So while the previous budget director kept that level consistent on the revenue side, we weren't actually recognizing that number in alignment with previous years because the settlement amounts were lower.
I understand that the settlement amounts would go down, but the way this is answered says that how we were allocating expenses for CARES didn't align with what we could use the settlement for. So what I am hoping for some clarity on is what were we trying to expense in terms of CARES that didn't align with what we could use those funds for?
And apologies, that's an ambiguity in the response that we didn't anticipate. That is not how we intended to respond to the question.
Okay,
the
so
only
the
misalignment-
issue is that the funds are not there.
Correct. They
Okay.
they came in at a lower level than had been budgeted. Not the funds were allocated inappropriately. Just we had less than we had anticipated.
So did any opiate funds come in? Because when I looked in March, it was a zeroed out line, as in no funds received at all. So did we receive anything since we last checked in March
For fiscal year 2026,
for 2025?
we'll confirm and report back. I do believe there's one final outstanding lawsuit with settlement forthcoming. We'll confirm on when that payment will be made, and we'll share that information.
Okay. And then in your answer for question 16, the city's RISE grant, you noted in there that there's no missing revenue. So I'm assuming that there is a change between March and now in terms of revenue coming in association with that grant. But I also want to note that we were utilizing those funds in fiscal year 2025 and 2026 to support housing services advocate position. So how do we anticipate being able to continue to support that position as those funds expire?
So the intention is to apply again for
Okay.
this grant. We would hope to get it so that we can continue, but this is reflective of the fact that the grant is expiring.
Okay. I mean, because they do excellent work. They work very hard. It would be a critical loss to both tenants in the city as well as our unhoused folks that we are providing gap services to between what our providers in the county is doing and what's actually needed in terms of engagement through those two positions. So it is certainly concerning to me if we are losing the funding that supports those two positions. That was my kind of follow-up question on there. And then I think this is my last one. Sorry, everyone. Question 46. This is in relation to the health insurance rebates. In here you noted that the related health insurance rebate program was not enacted in 2025 because certain changes to employee health insurance benefits would have been required, but there's no explanation as to what we either provided or didn't provide that caused us to no longer be eligible for those rebates.
So the rebates that were put into the budget were based on us changing employee benefits. So it's not that we were not eligible for them. They were programs that we had asked to be researched. We had received figures for those programs, and those numbers were added into the budget. We did not implement the programs.
Okay. So, because the way that this is sort of worded indicates that we had at one point qualified for those rebates and that we no longer do because we're either providing services or not providing benefits. and it's unclear as to what we would have to provide or stop providing in order to continue to qualify. And whether that makes fiscal sense for us to adjust to those changes to capture that revenue. So I was just hoping to get some clarification on, does that make sense to you? Yes? No? Am I
not really.
confusing you?
No, because we did put here that it was not enacted in 2025, to mean it never started. So because we did not, the changes that would have been required, we did not put those in place.
I guess what I'm asking for is what changes will we have had to make to our benefit program in order to qualify?
Without going into detail, it would have been a reduction in employee benefits in order to qualify for the rebates.
Okay. And is this a federal program?
No.
No, this is a state program.
It's
Or was it
programs
health insurance?
offered by the health insurance
Okay.
carriers.
Question 39. This is in regard to the SAFER grant. This is another one that I was a bit confused about. I understand from my reading of going through the SAFER grant on the federal website, I believe that grant was last awarded in 2023, and there's no indications that it was renewed. And my discussions with Treasurer Shonafar indicated that it seems like there was a misalignment where we may have been granted a total sum amount, and that total sum amount was put every year rather than spreading that total sum amount for each fiscal year for a multi-year grant. I could be wrong, but that's what he made it sound like. But the response that you provided said that for the SAFER grant, the fire department, grant scope was changed, making the fire department ineligible. When I went and looked on the federal website, it didn't look like they had started any new grant cycle. So I was hoping that you could provide some explanation, like what is it that makes us ineligible currently? Like what changes were put into place that we're no longer eligible, and was there another announcement that maybe I missed? I mean, I looked back in March and I saw that the last application portal was, I think, 2023, fiscal year 2023. That was supposed to carry through 2025.
We can check with the fire chief on, what the exact changes were to the grant. What was in 2025 revenue was the full amount, as you mentioned, and that actually happened in multiple lines within the budget where those multi-year grants, you will see the full amount there.
Correct.
Each year.
I think it was a $1.2 million grant that should have been spread out like $400,000 a year for 3 years, and instead it was booked as $1.2 million every year for those 3 years.
Right, and that's a decision that was made by the prior budget director and administration. What we expect to do is moving forward, make sure that we only budget the portion of the grant that will be received in that actual year, even in the multi-year grants.
Okay. And then my only other comment, I believe Councilmember Brody, you had asked about Tier 6 reform, and they didn't really provide you with an answer. But if you look at our retirement expenses, which are, I think they were like 19.9 million roughly, and the anticipated 8% hit or increase, it should be right around $159,000 in increased retirement expenses as a result to the adjustments made to Tier 5 and Tier 6 for the city. Depending, again, on where not all of the employees that are in that 19.9 million are tier 5 and tier 6, so it could be slightly less depending on where in the tiers those folks are. But that was my down and dirty math when that came out. I wouldn't expect or anticipate it to be significantly higher than that. I mean, we can certainly ask for you guys to work with budget to project out that number a little more fluidly for us. We would love to get that number if we could. But I just noted that when they responded, there wasn't a real clear answer to you, Councilmember Brody, so I just wanted to flag that. Those are all my questions. I want to turn it over to the rest. Yes, Deputy Mayor Ellis. I just know that I've been getting that question a lot from the press, so, and I know it was asked in here, and I'm just explaining the math was based upon our adopted 2026 budget total retirement expenditures, which were roughly about 19.9 million. When you 0.8% out that, it comes out to roughly 159,000 in additional expenditures. That does not include expenses that may go up because as our salaries go up, we pay more in retirement. So there's going to be other impacts to that particular component of our budget. But, and again, I say that is a rough estimate because not everybody in the city is tier 5, tier 6. We still have some tier 4 folks floating around somewheres.
I think it'd be good to understand once you guys have gotten that guidance from the state, obviously totally understanding we are in the same boat as every municipality across the state and school district. So understanding what that number is going to look like and when we're going to have those obligations, I think will be really important going forward. It's very late, so I'm going to be quick. I know there's a mid-year financial report that I'm assuming you guys are working on. Do you have an estimate of when that will be available? I mean, the mid-year is, okay. Some other folks not in this room, in other branches of government, have taken liberties with how long they take. So I just wanted to make sure we understood when we could expect it. The mayor, I know, put out an ask for assistance from the private sector with funding of pools and things like that. And I'd love to know what the plan is there, if anything is firmed up, and if it hasn't, what is also the plan?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, so, just to level set, opening our 4 pools with the new Albany West pool, which will be opening later this summer, has been and is one of the main priorities of this administration. We view recreation in many ways as the front door to the city's violence prevention programming. So keeping the pools open and for as long as possible, for as many weeks and as many hours as possible to, is a priority. At this point, all I will say is we have received outreach from entities in the private sector who want to support the city and want to support providing safe spaces for our young people to recreate and swim when they're out of school. We can't give firm commitments on what's been discussed at this moment, but we do anticipate the pools opening on time and being open for the summer. Certainly more to come there, but that's all I have for now.
Understood. Thank you. I know one of the other questions was about working with the Department of Engineering to prioritize different projects, and there were 32 mentioned for this fiscal year. I'm wondering if you could shed any light on which of those have been prioritized or deprioritized, and if that, those 32 are expected to still happen this year or not, based on where we are with staffing, as I know Councilmember Powell has brought up before.
Apologies, this is capital projects, not street improvements.
Sorry, it was.
I
yeah,
understand,
no, good
Councilmember.
question. I forget exactly which question it was. There's a
It
lot of them in
was
here.
a response to your question about, there is a SIP question. I think it's
Might be
earlier.
like question 77 or question 78, if we're thinking of the same one. But I will say, oh, sorry.
Question 80.
Oh, 80, okay.
So sorry, Red, our biggest SIP line is street reconstruction, to be clear. Sorry for not having that ready.
Sure. So in terms of the capital projects, Department of Engineering is pulling together a more comprehensive overview of the projects that we're looking to continue this year. Certainly share that once that becomes available and final. And then the street reconstruction process is a little bit different. There's a very detailed, excellent presentation that the Traffic and Engineering Department made to the Human Resources Commission, or Human Rights Commission earlier this year. That's publicly available, I believe, and that goes through the very lengthy process in determining the priority streets to be focused on for each year.
And are all of them happening this year?
We'll have to circle back on that.
Okay, thank you.
Those were authorized already in the bond request, and when we do the bond
Understood.
authorization, we do receive the full list of streets that are planned for resurfacing prior to voting on the bond. So I can provide you with the list.
Right, and I think there's certain, like the Washington Park Complete Streets work was also authorized, but I've been told it's on hold. So I think there's just questions about, regardless of whether they were authorized, if things are actually still going to happen this year. And they're fair questions. I mean, the question, if we're short-staffed, even if it was authorized through capital funding, we might have to make some tough decisions. So I totally understand that. I think clarity around which might still be happening and which are not would be helpful. Right. Okay. Appreciate that.
Councilmember Brody, do you mind if I just add something quickly to that? I just would note that there has been discussion and desire from some council members to, and we've brought it up in leadership to potentially re-examine some of the bond authorizations that we've given. That it might be something that maybe we don't want to, in fact, move forward with all of the different bond authorizations, and that obviously we'd like to take the lead from the administration on this, but there is definitely a willingness to look at those and re-examine those at some point. So thank you.
Sure. It was the perfect segue. Thank you. We have 143 million in bans outstanding that are coming due in March of next year. And I'm wondering if the plan is, what our initial thoughts are around either paying them off or converting them to long-term debt. That's going to be a whopper of an expense that I don't think anybody there's no amount of state aid that's coming for that we can anticipate. We do. We hope that track record continues on an upward trajectory.
I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, do you mind speaking into the microphone just because it's I get regular outreach from people about how we don't talk loud enough and into mics.
Absolutely. I was saying that this may be a question most appropriately answered by the treasurer. There have been some talks, but I think it wasn't at the top of the list, but yes, that is a big number that we're going to have to think about very, very soon about what we're going to do with it.
Okay.
As those rands become due.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. And then my last question was about police overtime, because I know that was cited as one of the major reasons why we had a structural deficit last year and this year. And from the initial Q1 results, it looks like police overtime is trending, unfortunately, as it had before. I know there's a new class that just graduated, which is awesome. 21 folks who joined. I've heard one has already left to go to a suburb, which is very frustrating. And that we have a number who are slated to retire throughout the course of the year, which might actually make the net gain sort of neutral in staffing of full-time APD officers and rank staff. So I'm wondering what conversations we can be having about that number, because trending to, you know, I don't mean to say achieve, but to get to that $2 million point again so early, while we still have time to stem it, is, I think, something would like to be working on at this point.
So we are in ongoing and honestly constant conversations with Chief Cox about staffing. And so, as you mentioned, the class that just graduated, a big help to some of that. The class that was just hired, not as much of an immediate help as there's, you know, their academy time. So we are definitely looking at other ways. There were a number of reimbursable overtime hours that we were finding we were not billing out for. So that's going to be something that we're watching very closely and making sure that we're getting those things billed so we can get reimbursement for them, which will help bring the number down some. But it's an ongoing thing. There are a number of ideas that we are working with the chief on for long term. What we can do, we've been talking around some options for the testing. There's just a number of things that we can look at. I don't know that it will bring that number down significantly this year. Full transparency, we are looking at the number, I think this week, and it's still trending in the same direction. So we're working on it, and we will continue to work around it and talk about it and come up with what we can do as we move out.
Thank you. And I know, as a member of the Public Safety Committee as well, I'd speak for myself only, but I would like to think the rest of my council colleagues would join me in saying that obviously our public safety is an incredibly high priority for the 6th Ward at a minimum. And so however we can be creative in keeping our community safe while achieving more rational projections as well, I think, in going into 2027. I mean, if we need to bake in certain numbers, it's not ideal, but I would much rather understand what they are and put them into the budget for next year than have to move funds around and compensate for it, because it's been happening every single year. So I think if that's the way it's going to be for a little bit, as we know, it takes a long time for cadets to ramp up, et cetera. We're happy to work with you on what that plan looks like longer term too. Thank you.
Councilmember Farrell.
Thank you. I will be brief. I have one question, but also I did want to take the opportunity, since this is our first real public meeting with you since the state aid package came in, to obviously publicly thank the governor and the speaker and the leader of the Senate, along with our Capital Region delegation, Senator Fahey, Assembly members Romero and McDonald, for their advocacy. But I also am very aware of how much the mayor personally, and also you, Deputy Mayor Ellis, went and fought for that funding and really made a huge difference. So I wanted to thank you for that, because that matters. It's unlike anything we've ever seen, and I think that the additional push from this administration made a huge difference. And I also wanted to thank you for all of your work, Ms. Dixon, on all of the, Commissioner Dixon, I should say, on all that you're doing on the other end. I feel like that you, Deputy Mayor Ellis, you had the fun side of trying to get the money and bring the money in, and I know you're involved on the cutting side too, clearly, but I know, Commissioner Dixon, you're really leading the charge on that, and it is incredibly important work, but it's also difficult work. You have an HR background, which I think is one of the hardest jobs ever, so I think you're used to that kind of thing, but it doesn't make it any easier. So I just wanted to, in the public meeting, say thank you for it. And I know that we're coming up against game starting, so I will have my quick question and then be done. So it's question ID 8. It's like in the middle of the packet, but it's about the Office of Court Administration being up to date on its billing. And my question on that is, I know that OCA had been in a back and forth with the previous administration about building a new courthouse. And I was just curious if perhaps that was why we didn't get any reimbursement for that. And also, is that something we should be concerned about in terms of budget as well, that we might need to build a new courthouse?
Thank you, Councilmember. To address the first half of that question, no, unrelated to the conversations with OCA about potentially constructing a new courthouse. It's my understanding that was a clerical mistake why the reimbursement forms weren't submitted. They are being submitted if they haven't yet already, so we should receive the back payment for the OCA cleaning fees. In regards to the courthouse, I don't think it will come as a surprise to anybody on this council or in the public that our court infrastructure is outdated and in need of an upgrade. As this administration looks at priority projects, I would imagine that is one of them. But no shovels in the ground will not be going in imminently, but we are aware of the need to modernize our court facilities, and have had very productive conversations with the appropriate partners, to try to move the ball forward there. And I just want to thank the Office of Court Administration for their guidance and support on this particular piece.
Thank you. And to be clear, I completely agree that a new courthouse and all of that is definitely needed. That is, it's just, as we're talking about budget, it's important to keep these things in mind. Thank you very much.
And I will just note on that end, like the current facilities are not ADA compliant. So if we have somebody who is being prosecuted for a crime or is arrested in the city of Albany and requires arraignment, who has mobility impairments, there is literally no way other than to carry them in order for them to have access to their attorney while sitting before the judge, which is a disgrace, in my opinion. Also, anybody who is utilizing any of the OCA facilities here in City Hall, again, it is not easy for anyone with a mobility impairment to access City Hall in any way, shape, or form for any of the services that are needed here. And it is incredibly dangerous for anybody in a wheelchair, particularly in the winter, to utilize the basement access because it is on an incline, and in slippery weather, they just slide right down the hill. So just wanted to note that as part of that discussion, that's a huge component of why we need to start to consider those types of projects, even though I know the money's not there. Councilmember Powell or Councilmember Lumpkin, do you have any questions pertaining to the budget question responses that we got? No. Just to sort of wrap things up, I also wanted to note that in advance of the meeting, I did ask for the city treasurer to send us a report of cash on hand to date, and that was received. And after expenses for this month, the actuals of cash on hand are roughly $17,362,000. That cash on hand report goes all the way through the end of the year with projected anticipated revenue month by month and projected anticipated expenditures. The treasurer believes, based upon the additional 20 million, that we should be ending December with about 2.8 million on hand, provided nothing crazy happens in the city, which is in a much better position than we were a month ago. So again, thank you so much for all the work and advocacy that you did on behalf of the city with regards to securing those legislative or the additional state funds. And I just uphold Councilmember Farrell's compliments to our state delegation and all of our state leadership and working to support the city of Albany. Is there anything else, any other business that wants to be discussed this evening? Yes, Councilmember Farrell.
Just quickly, I should also have mentioned John Riley and the thanks for all of the work, because obviously you've been deeply involved too. So thank you as well.
I know, crazy.
And any other questions or business that anybody wants to bring up? Going once, going twice?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn by Councilmember Farrell. Do we have a second? Second by Councilmember Lumpkin. All those in favor? Aye. Have a good night, everyone. Enjoy the Knicks.